All right, hi. So for our final presentation for punishment in society, Dan and I decided to focus on rehabilitation and why it is a more effective treatment than incarceration when it comes to drug offenders.
In our introduction, we have found that the US contains 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. More than 1.5 million drug arrests in 2018, 86% due to drug possession only. African Americans are 13.4 times more likely to be sentenced to prison on drug offenses than whites. Roughly 23.5 million people have an illicit drug abuse or alcohol problem, while only 11%, roughly 2 million, seek treatment for addiction and alcoholism. Drug rehabilitation would be a better economical and societal problem solver than incarceration. Rehabilitation is cheaper than incarceration. People in rehabilitation are less likely to commit expensive crimes upon completion of their program. Costs of law enforcement and court costs would decrease due to lower crime rates as a result of rehabilitation effectiveness.
So as Dan stated in the previous slide, African Americans are more likely than whites to be arrested on drug offenses. So over 277,000 people in prison nationwide for drug offenses. 56% of them are either African American or Latino. Federal prosecutors are also twice as likely to charge African Americans when it comes to mandatory minimum sentences rather than whites on similar drug charges. African Americans report less lifetime use of cocaine compared to whites, only 8.5% to 17.6%. This statistic includes both crack and powder cocaine, pointing out that African Americans were the most frequent users of crack cocaine. African Americans are more likely to seek treatment than the rest of the US population. Even though they are more likely to seek treatment, they are less likely to have success at rehabilitation.
Some of the problems with prison are violence and mental illness. We will go over violence first. Physical violence, victimization. 35% of men are victimized from physical violence in prison, and 24% of women are victimized. With sexual violence victimization, 10% of men are victimized and 25% of women are victimized. Deaths in prison, deaths by suicide were 255 in 2016, and deaths by homicide were 95 in 2016. Some of the quotes we found on mental illness were, "This report details our findings that 23% of persons released from Utah State Prison from 1998 to 2002 meet criteria for serious mental illness." And the other quote states, "However, only 51% of state prisons provide 24-hour mental health care."
So the cost of the war on drugs, as it would be known, incarceration has little positive effects when it comes to treating drug offenders. In the first 2 weeks upon release from prison, drug offenders are 13 more times likely than the general population to overdose on drugs. There's also a huge economic impact the war on drugs has taken on the US. So since its inception in 1971, we've spent over $1 trillion fighting the war on drugs. Depending on the institution, it can cost anywhere from $33,000 to $50,000 to incarcerate a single prisoner for a whole year. An example of how the U.S. could save money: marijuana legalization would save $7.7 billion a year, along with a version of enforcement costs would create a $6 billion tax revenue, equating to $13.7 billion each year. We've already kind of seen a transition to marijuana legalization. Some states have already legalized it, but if we legalized it on the federal level, making it legal for everybody, we would save even more money.
Rehabilitation in the prison system. What is it? Does it work? Rehabilitation, defined by the WHO, is a set of interventions designed to optimize functioning and reduce disability in individuals with health conditions in interaction with their environment. Drug addiction is a disease and not a choice. Drug rehabilitation, what does it entail? It entails getting people back into society safely and making sure that they're free of drug use. Individual sessions, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, focuses on behavioral responses to specific triggers. Once the triggers are defined, the therapist will guide the patients towards healthier responses. During these sessions, the patient is free to be open, fears and concerns without judgment. Group sessions, by hearing other stories of addiction, it makes each individual feel as part of a fellowship where they can socialize and heal together as a team rather than going through it alone. Family sessions are similar. They help the individual in a family type setting rather than a group setting. Miscellaneous forms of therapy are art, dance, exercise, anger management. These will help the individual in a different aspect for therapy. 3 out of 10 people remain clean for a year after receiving treatment, according to rehabcenter.net. Inpatient treatment programs show higher success rates, 21%, than outpatient programs, 18%. Costs, inpatient programs cost more, ranging from $6,000 to $60,000 for 30 days of treatment, while outpatient can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 for 3 months.
So as Daniel just discussed some rehabilitation programs, we wanted to throw in here a couple of stories that we found very inspirational. So the guy on the top, we see Michael Wagner. He began using marijuana in high school. He's said to escape reality, but he quickly transitioned to OxyContin and heroin as he grew older. He actually ended up dying by overdose over 15 times due to heroin. And he was arrested multiple times for driving under the influence. But after completing a recovery program, he has been substance free over 9 months, and now he's a recovery coach. And the guy on the bottom, Jeremy B, same story. He began using weed and alcohol in high school, but transitioned to heroin. He lost all of his former interests, such as music and skateboarding and art. And he actually attended a treatment program called Recovery Unplugged, where he rediscovered his passion for music because it was a program that was centered around music. That's an important thing to remember about rehabilitation programs. There's a bunch of different ones out there that focus around like music, art, dance, anger management. There's a bunch of different ones out there, as well as inpatient, outpatient programs, family programs, group sessions. It's all about trying to find which one works the best for you. Clearly, it was the music one for Jeremy, as he has been sober for over a year. He's maintained the same job, and he still goes to Narcotics Anonymous meetings regularly.
Some pros and cons for drug rehabilitation include they can be expensive. They have low success rate for inpatient and outpatient recovery. Patients might have to travel long distances to receive the treatment they need. Stereotypes associated with rehab patients, because people do not want to be stereotyped for getting the help they need. Leaving in friends and family to attend rehab can be challenging for some patients because their family might be a vital part of their support structure in their lives. Pros for drug rehabilitation include both inpatient and outpatient programs use a team of professionals to closely monitor the status of their patients. Many various forms of treatment are available to best suit the patient. Rehab centers provide a safe space for patients to feel judgment-free and connect with others going through the same experience. Learn new health alternatives for solving their problems without the use of substances. Patient success in rehab programs eliminate the chances of future recidivism in prisons.
All right, so along with the rehabilitation, we just want to throw in a couple other strategies to show more of an international perspective of how other countries deal with drug problems. So for Switzerland in the 1970s and 80s, there's a huge problem with heroin injections, which was causing HIV to spread dramatically. And half of the HIV cases were due to needle sharing and heroin injections. So in 1975, they enacted a federal drug act which focused on abstinence, but it actually kind of facilitated more people to do drugs. As we saw an increase in 1975 to 1992, there were only 4,000 people injecting originally, which transitioned to 30,000 people by the time it reached 1992. So in 1994, they developed a heroin assisted treatment model, which was basically a clinic that was run by doctors where people who want to use heroin could go to the clinic. The doctors would give them a clean heroin needle, give them heroin that had a known potency and strength, so they wouldn't overdose, and they could basically take heroin in a safe setting. And some of the results were really positive. So deaths due to injections decreased, along with deaths due by AIDS and HIV. Illicit heroin consumption also decreased. Street dealing decreased as well. Heroin doses stabilized instead of increasing for users, and a lot of the users actually found that their heroin intake levels decreased. They began kind of weaning off of the heroin due to the clinics and the treatment provided by the doctors. And while the cost of running the facilities is expensive, the societal costs such as law enforcement and incarceration also decreased. So the primary goal of these programs is, yes, you want the users to go to a safe space to use the drugs, but the ultimate goal is to wean them off through time. And this is a program that has definitely shown some positive results when it comes to decreasing heroin use among drug users in Switzerland.
Some foreign policies we took a look at were from Switzerland, Britain, and Germany. And some of the statistics we found were, since 1999, 770,000 Americans have died from drug overdoses in the US. 1999, 16,849 deaths were reported. 2017, 70,237 deaths were reported. This is just showing the increase of drug overdoses in the United States. Leading causes of death in the US for people under 50 equal accidental drug overdose. 47% of all overdose deaths due to fentanyl and synthetic opioids, 23% due to cocaine, 22% due to heroin. In the US, in 2018, there were increased cases of HIV in heterosexuals due to injecting. Some possible solutions to these situations are establishing harm reduction clinics to provide safe drug use and access to healthier substances, employing medical professionals to these clinics who can provide alternative treatment to drug users, or at least lower their substance intake, revise national drug policy to incorporate these clinics and provide safer drug use instead of risky illicit drug use on streets, greater implementations of drug courts to refer nonviolent drug offenders to receive treatment rather than incarceration.
So in conclusion, the war on drugs not only cost the U.S. a substantial amount of money, showing incarceration rates that cost around 182 billion a year. It's also caused a lot of racial tension because clearly the drug laws that the U.S. has, especially on cocaine, is not racially fair. That's why we see a lot more African Americans being incarcerated than any other population when it comes to the crack cocaine laws. And as you saw on slide 4, prison is definitely a very volatile environment. A lot of men and women get victimized inside of prison each year. A lot of people end up dying from suicide and homicides as well. Therefore, separating the nonviolent drug offenders from convicted felons who commit crimes such as murder and burglary and larceny, that'd be more beneficial for society and for everybody involved. As I stated earlier, mass incarceration is partly due to the amount of nonviolent drug offenders in prison. as compared to harm reduction strategies implemented in like Switzerland and the UK and Germany and stuff. US has a higher incarceration rate due to our strict drug policies. Um, as we stated earlier in this presentation, drug rehabilitation can take many different forms. We talked about inpatient, outpatient programs. We talked about family sessions, group sessions, individual sessions. There are miscellaneous programs for like music and sports, anger management, art. It's all just trying to find the correct program for the right person. And lastly, it's important to realize that drug addiction is a disease, so it must be treated as such. A lot of nonviolent drug offenders who go to prison do not receive the treatment they need. So when they get released, they go right back out using drugs. As we stated earlier, they're 13 times more likely to die of an overdose than the general population. So by implementing more rehabilitation programs, maybe starting some harm reduction clinics in the US, instead of sentencing nonviolent drug offenders to prison, we could both benefit economically and have a healthier society of people. So the last thing that Dan and I are going to share, because all we have left is references, we're just going to go over like the biggest thing we learned while researching this topic. Dan, if you want to start.
Yeah, I one of the biggest things I learned from doing my research in this project was the harm reduction strategy in Switzerland. I had no idea that they were taking this type of form of strategy to drug policies, and it shows that creating a safe space for heroin can reduce the numbers overall for the country, and it actually helped them. And Jordan will go over what he learned now.
Yeah, so the one of the things I found out, obviously I knew that prison has always been like a pretty dangerous place with a lot of dangerous people in it. I did not realize that there were so many deaths by suicide in prison. That statistic, 255 in 2016. That kind of really shocked me. But after completing this project, it's kind of easy to see why. You have a lot of nonviolent offenders who are in there for drug possession only, being mixed in with people who are convicted of murder and sexual assault and crimes that are similar to these. So it's kind of clear to see why there's so many cases of physical victimization in prison. Also, a whole another topic separate than this, but there's also a bunch of gang affiliations in prison that can also account for violence in prisons as well. So it's for all these reasons that we went over that Daniel and I both agree rehabilitation is just a better solution for mass incarceration. As we discussed, there are so many people that are in prison that probably shouldn't be because they're nonviolent drug offenders. What they need is treatment for their addiction rather than being punished for it. And not only will it make our incarceration rate decrease, but it also create a healthier society for everyone. And that's it. Did I stop recording? Oh, there it is.